Okay.
All right. I'm surprised that you weren't able to do it though.
I am too.
Yeah, because we're co-sharing it.
Yeah,
The
but I only have one host, so that might be the problem.
let's see if we got my clicker working here. All right, so you guys see the screen? Okay. All right, so I always like to start off with the benefits of macro photography because we have a lot of benefits over, say, a landscape or a wildlife photographer. Number one, shooting close to home. So I've got 4 parks within 20 minutes of my home, and I could literally stay home and make a living shooting in those parks. So I don't have to travel, say, like a landscape or a wildlife photographer to those national parks where all the great landscape and wildlife are. I can just do it right close to home, and I don't have to have plane fares and car rentals and hotel costs and travel away from home. So that's a really nice benefit. When it's too hot in the summer, which it's been here in Michigan, I can shoot indoors. Or in the wintertime when it gets too cold, I can shoot indoors. So that's a really nice benefit we have too. Wildlife landscape photographers can't do that. Subject matter changes every month. So the parks that I go to, I have my favorite locations that I always go to each month. And there's new things every month because the life cycle of the plants is constantly changing. So there's always something new to shoot each month throughout the 4 seasons. It says we have 5 people in the waiting room. Do you need to check those in? Yeah, let's see here. We'll get them all in here.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how.
I just checked them in,
Thank you.
I think.
Because I'm not getting
one more, Carl. Okay. All right, so they should all be in. Okay, shoot any time of the day. Another nice benefit that we have. Landscape wildlife photographers shoot early morning, late evening, and they don't shoot during the middle of the day because the light gets a little too harsh for the landscape. But macro photographers can shoot all day long because we control the light. We shoot small areas, and so we have control of the light on that small area. So it doesn't matter what time of day we go out, we will be able to shoot and control that light. So that's really nice. More creativity with the shallow depth of field that we work with, shooting those small f-stops, 2.8, 3.5, getting a real shallow depth of field, very little in focus, a lot out of focus. It's a creative style that macro photographers tend to like. And it's something like, again, that we can do, but other types of photography generally don't do. The bottom one is your own personal art. Now, in 2004, I was in Yosemite photographing some landscapes because I've been shooting for about 3 years at that time, and I wasn't sure exactly which direction I was going into. I was doing some landscape, I was doing some wildlife, and I was doing some macro, and so I was trying to still figure out what I wanted to do. But I was in Yosemite, and I'm shooting and fighting for tripod space with a whole bunch of other photographers. Whoops. My clicker's not working real well today. So any of you that have been to those national parks, this is actually a scene that Ansel Adams made famous in one of his books, and everybody wants to go and shoot the exact same image that Ansel Adams did. So on that evening, when I was waiting for the light to get right to take the shot, I realized that this wasn't working for me, this landscape, because all I was doing was just shooting everything that everybody else was shooting, and I didn't have anything original. The only one that this was original was Ansel Adams when he shot it, and everybody else after that is just copying. So what I found out is that with my macro photography, that all the images that I would go and shoot at the local parks, and as I said, as the seasons change and those subjects get erased by the environment, those are original images. I was the only one to witness that subject, photograph it, and it no longer exists, so it's my own original image. So that's important to me as a, as a photographer and an artist, that I have original images. All right.
Please mute everybody if you're not Mike.
Yeah, I just muted somebody. All right, so are you a gear freak? Are you one of those that has all the top of the line equipment and the best lenses and all the little gadgets that go along with it? Like this guy here. He's obviously got a lot of money spent in all that gear. The nice thing about macro photography is that you don't have to have expensive gear to be a top quality macro photographer. Now, a friend of mine named Bill Fortney, who has been, freelance photographer for well over 40 years and worked for Nikon for 10 years before he retired. 40 years and worked for Nikon. I ran into Bill at a photo conference, and he asked me, why I wasn't using their pro cameras. In other words, I'm using the D7000, and he says, it's a good camera, but how come you're not using the pro bodies? And I says, well, Bill, I says, a good 60% of the people that come through my workshops are using cameras that are $1,000 or less. I said, if I'm using your $6,500 camera, those people leave my workshop saying, well, Mike's images look really good because he's got a professional camera, and I've got a camera under $1,000, so I won't get images as good as he does. Well, my camera, when it was last sold, and that camera is 9 years old right now, and I'm still using it. When it was last sold, it sold for $896. So my camera's under $1,000. And so that gives people that are in my workshops and have those inexpensive cameras, the feeling that they're going to be able to get images as good as I'm getting them. And I always tell them, if you're not getting them as good as my camera's getting them, then there's operator error going on. You're doing something wrong. I'll take even a $500 entry-level camera, and I will produce images that I can get published in magazines. So you don't have to have an expensive camera to do macro photography. Now, I'm not going to tell you that my camera would be a good camera for, say, a bird photographer shooting birds in flight where he needs high frames per second, or sports photographer, or maybe you shoot in low light conditions and you need high ISO with low noise. My camera doesn't do those things, but we don't require those things for macro photography, so it doesn't mean anything to me. So again, we can get by with a less expensive camera. Now, my lens that I use is a Tamron 90mm macro lens, and it sells for $649. My 18-400 Tamron zoom lens sells for $649. My tripod is $180. My ball head's $329. Altogether, my equipment runs out at $2,703. And you can see down below just those camera bodies. The D850 is $29.99, which is hundreds of dollars more than all my equipment together. And the D6 professional model 6500 is thousands and thousands of dollars more than all my equipment put together. So you don't have to spend a ton of money to be a macro photographer. So all brands, I've seen them all in my workshops. I've seen all the models that are made by all the different brands, and then they all do great work. So again, whatever you own, you will do fine. Now, the macro lenses that are available come in 3 different ranges. They come in a short range, mid range, and a long range. Come on, clicker. Stupid clicker's not working today. All right. Focal lengths. You'll see in the top portion there in the white, you'll see the focal lengths of the different types of macro lenses that are available. And these are the most popular ones. Now, there are a few that are in between these numbers, but they're rare and I hardly ever see them. These are the ones that I see on a regular basis in my workshops. In the short focal length, you'll see the 60mm. Down at the bottom, you'll see a Tamron, Nikon, Canon has one. Sigma is actually a 50mm. Theirs is 50 instead of 60. That's in their short focal length. Get into the mid-range, on the low end would be the Tamron 90mm. And then in the Canon has a 100mm and then 105 from Sigma and Nikon. And then in the telephoto, the long range lenses, on the low end would be the 150 Sigma. And then in the 180, which has always been the most popular of the telephoto macro lenses, Tamron no longer makes their 180, so that's not available from Tamron anymore. And I heard rumor that Sigma is going to discontinue their 180 as well. So probably the only one you'll have left would be the Canon 180. In the 200mm, that is the longest of the true macro lenses. That's made by Nikon. So up in the upper right corner, you'll see a little short lens. That's my old Fuji S5 camera. And I'm shooting this Rosa Sharon flower. Now that's a pretty good sized flower. It's not a small flower, it's pretty big. And in order to fill the frame, like you see over in the left upper corner, I had to get in about 12 inches away from that flower. So I don't have a lot of working distance between that flower and my lens in order to fill the frame with that flower. Now the image below, you see the little longer lens on the S5, and that's a 90mm Tamron lens. And in order to get the exact same shot that I did with the 60, the same framing, I have to move farther back away from the subject. So a longer lens gives me more working distance. So now you can see I'm maybe up to close to 3 feet away. Now at the bottom image, I'm using a 180 macro lens. And so that long telephoto lens has more reach. So you can see I've got a lot of working distance between me and that flower. So why is that important? Well, if that flower was a live subject, say a butterfly or a dragonfly, probably wouldn't be too happy if I'm using a 60 millimeter and I'm 12 inches from its face. But if I have a long telephoto lens like that 180 at the bottom, you see I have a lot of working distance. I got a much greater chance that that live subject's going to stay there and not take off. So if you're going to shoot a lot of bugs and a lot of live subjects, then probably better to go into a longer telephoto macro lens. I don't recommend a 60 outdoors because you have to be so close to your subject matter. It gets very difficult, especially if you're shooting things on the ground. You'll be on your hands and knees constantly. Most people end up in that mid-range. They're into that 90, 100, 105. And the reason being that they go to the mid-range is because it's in the price range they're willing to spend. See, when you're talking a long lens like a 180 or a 200 or 150, you're going to get up into that $1,500, maybe $1,800 price range. And a lot of people hear that and they're like, nah, I'm not spending that much money on a lens. But you can get a Tamron 90 for $649, or you can get maybe the Nikon or Canon in the 100, 105 for another $100 or so. So it's under $1,000. So most people, that's why they end up in that mid-range. And 80% of the people that come to my workshops are using the mid-range lenses, and they work fine. I mean, I use a 90 millimeter and it works okay. But again, if you're going to shoot a lot of, if you're going to be a really hardcore bug photographer and you're going to shoot a lot of live subject, probably a 180, if you could find one, or a 200 Nikon or the 150 Sigma would be the better choice for a lot of live subjects. Now they also started coming out with these zoom lenses that say they have macro capabilities. So a few years back, Tamron came out with their first one, which was an 18 to 270, and then they went to the 16 to 300, and then the one they have now, which I'm using, is the 18 to 400. So what I like about using these new zoom lenses with macro capabilities is that I can use that 18 millimeters if I want to show an environmental shot. So here I've got another camera set up with my 18 millimeters wide angle on the Tamron, so I can shoot this wide angle shot. And then with the 400 millimeter, it gives me a lot of reach. So if I want to shoot a frog at the edge of a pond, I've got 400 millimeters to reach out and capture subjects at a distance. So it kind of takes the place of my long range macro lens. So in other words, that 180 that I used to own, I sold it because when the zoom lenses came out, I was able to get my reach that I needed with the 400 millimeter. And so I didn't need the long range telephoto anymore. Now, this lens will also shoot in pretty close, not into the macro range of a true macro lens, but it'll focus down to 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. That is a really small little area. 90% of what I photograph is larger areas than 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. A macro lens, when you get to the minimum focusing distance and you're in that 1-to-1 ratio, you're actually shooting an area as small as 7/8 of an inch by 1 3/8 inches. That's much smaller than what you see here. But I'm basically a close-up photographer, so I shoot larger areas. So that 18 to 400 can do a good majority of the type of photography I do. But if I needed to get into a small area, so like this little watch, I'm inside the gears there, I can always pull out my Tamron 90 to get into really tight areas if I need to. So those are the only two lenses that I carry, is the 90 millimeter and the 18 to 400. Now, Hunt's Photo is going to give you a discount, and it's actually a very nice discount. It's like 20%. That's pretty rare because it's hard to find discounts on camera bodies and lenses nowadays. And so that's a really good discount, 20% off. Now the tripod that I use is made by Vanguard. It's called the Ultra Pro 2 Plus 263 AT, and it is the best tripod that I found for macro photography. Of course, it's good for any type of photography, but it really works well for macro. Now Vanguard has just came out with a brand new upgraded version of this tripod. Now it's listed on their website, but it is not available yet. They're still waiting for them to come over from overseas, so they have them in the US to sell. Now, I had got a hold of one about a month ago, and it has some nice upgrades to it. A little bit more expensive than the Ultra Pro 2, but it has some nice features. Now, Hunt's Photo had contacted Vanguard when they heard that they were discontinuing this Ultra Pro 2 Plus. And they said, hey, we'll buy out whatever you have in your warehouse. So they had 150 some tripods left in the warehouse, and Hunt's bought them all. And they are selling them at a discounted price. So they normally runs $179 for this tripod. But Hunt's is selling them, I think, at $134.99. When you get the link, you'll be able to see what it's discounted. So it's a pretty good discount. And they've already sold, I think, about 100 of those tripods already since they got them about a month and a half ago. So once they're gone, that's it. They won't be available anymore. But it's an excellent tripod. Now, what's nice about the tripod is the center post raises up, and then it goes horizontal. And then once you get it horizontal, you can actually move it up and down. If you need to move the camera higher or lower, you'll be able to move it any position you need to go to. And that's the great thing about this, is that with macro photography, we are constantly moving our cameras into areas where a standard tripod may not get us. So this works really, really well. And you can see you can get that camera away from the tripod, easier to work your camera. I also found a situation where I was at a botanical garden, and I was on this boardwalk, and I saw an interesting pattern in this tree trunk, an abstract pattern. And I only had my 90mm with me, so I couldn't zoom in with my zoom lens. So I had to move the camera closer to frame up the subject that I wanted. So you can see I could extend that center post out to get the camera closer to the tree, whereas if I had a standard tripod, that camera would be about 1.5 feet back on the center of the tripod, and I wouldn't be able to get it that close with that boardwalk there. And then another situation up in Minnesota, it was wintertime, and I was on this bridge, and down below there was some ice in the stream, and there was leaves locked in the ice, and I wanted to photograph those leaves. And so I was able to extend my center post out over that railing and able to shoot downward. So that's an excellent tripod. Will get you into places that a standard tripod will not go. Now, ball heads, most of you probably own a ball head similar to this, where you have a big metal housing. Top portion, you see the little ball is housed, and then in the front part, you'll see that little U slot there. Right in the front, there's a little U slot. Now, that's where we maneuver our camera when we're shooting downward. You know, we want to shoot downward, we maneuver into that little U slot. And so we are a little bit limited, because working in that U slot, maybe we have to pivot the head back and forth, left and right. So we have a little limitations with the standard ball head. So a few years back, I came across this head by a company called Acratech. And they've cut away all that big metal housing. So you can see how all the back of the ball is exposed, but this makes it really lightweight. And also it's made out of aluminum, so that even makes it even lighter. Now the key to this head is the front 45 degrees has been removed. So there's no more U slot. This is just totally exposed here, so I can move my camera in any position I need to move it to. So I'm not limited with that U slot and pivoting back and forth. I can literally move my camera any place I need to go when I'm setting up shooting a subject. So that really makes my life a lot easier, that type of head. Now this head is not inexpensive. It runs about $329, but there will be a little discount from Hunt's on this if you're interested in it. Now the accessories, I do carry a group of accessories, but I don't have time to do this in a 90 minutes. So I wanted to at least make sure that I covered the most important accessory that's available, okay? This is a dame's rocket flower. And you can see the top portion of the flower looks like pink petals. Now they're not supposed to be pink, they're supposed to be purple. Now you may think that if you're losing colors or colors are being altered, it can happen when the sunlight hits your subject. So you might think, well, that's maybe on a sunny day, but no, this is on a cloudy day. This is the total overcast day that I shot this subject. And you can see how the colors have washed out. Now the light is intense enough coming even on a cloudy day that it can wash out your colors. So what you want to do is pick up a 12-inch diffuser, The 12-inch diffuser is the only size that I've ever used. Usually it's, you know, as I said, shooting small areas, we can control the light, and I've only used the 12-inch. They have 20-inch models and bigger, but I've never found a need to have a 20-inch. So the 12 is nice because it folds down into itself. It makes about a 4-inch round circle that you can actually fit in your pocket. Now, once I put that 12-inch diffuser over top of that Dame's rocket flower that I just showed you, it brings the color right back to the natural color. So the image on the left, there's no diffuser, image on the right with the diffuser. This is like a magic trick when you see it happen. You can see with your eyes go from washed out colors to perfect colors. It's really cool how it works. But these things are only like $15 and Hunts is going to sell them to you for $9.95. So there is no reason why you should not have one of these in your bag. And again, this is even on a cloudy day when you would assume that you already have a big giant diffuser up there, right? There's no sun hitting your subject, blowing out your colors and causing issues. No, this is a cloudy day. All right, on that same cloudy day, I'm walking down a trail and I could see this leaf here where you can see the top portion of the leaf. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. That top portion is running parallel to the sky. And those are the parts of the flowers and the different things that you photograph that are running parallel to the sky that are being washed out. The front part of this leaf, as you can see, is dipped down, so it's running 90 degrees to the sky and it retains its color. So again, it's those things that are running parallel. But once I put the diffuser over top, I can get that color back, not 100%, but enough where I can go into post-processing and have enough color there to darken that down. Image on the left, you see, it's kind of washed out to a white that's lost its color, so it'd be very difficult to bring that back. So again, make sure you get one of these 12-inch diffusers. Now, let's say it's a sunny day. I'm going to diffuse my subject 100% of the time. I'm going to diffuse that subject. I don't like sun hitting my subject because it can alter the colors. It can actually change the colors. It can create shadows in areas I don't want shadows, and it can also blow out colors, just like we saw on a cloudy day. So the image on the left, that is a sumac branch, and as you can see, the leaves have turned to a yellowish green. That's early morning sun hitting those leaves, and it turned them to a yellowish green. Well, I don't want yellowish green leaves because that's not their natural color. Once I diffuse it, put the diffuser between the branch and the sun, you see on the right side, it comes back to the natural green color it's supposed to be. So again, sunny days, I'm diffusing 100% of the time, but I still have to carry that diffuser even on cloudy days because there's times when I will lose color on cloudy days. That's the most important tool that I have in my bag. You may even find that when you're shooting indoors, you're going to have a subject, might have a little sheen to it, and the diffuser is going to be able to correct that problem. Again, sometimes light even in the house will alter colors and change the brightness and blow out some of the color. Now some people would say, well, you could try and use a polarizer to do this. And when I started shooting macro and I was having these issues, I actually did try a polarizer, and it worked sometimes, but it didn't work all the time. Certain subjects it didn't seem to affect. So with the diffuser, it works 100% of the time. So I just stopped using the polarizer and went strictly to the diffusers. Now you're thinking, do I have to hold this diffuser? Yeah, you could if you wanted to. You could always hold it. But what happens if you're trying to work your camera and you got to hold the diffuser? And so Wimberly came out with a PLAMP, P-L-A-M-P. And you can see on the left side, there's a big, large clamp, and that actually can clamp onto your tripod leg. And then you have a flexible tubing that goes to the other side, which has another clamp, smaller clamp. And that is what you can attach your diffuser into, or you could actually clamp a stem of a flower with that clamp. So that if it's a slightly windy day, you can attach that on the stem of the flower and hold it from moving back and forth. Now, if you're using a shorter lens, focal length lens, and you're in close to your subject, this would work okay if you clamped it on the tripod leg. But let's say if you're shooting farther back, maybe 3-4 feet away from your subject, and you clamp that on the tripod, that flexible tubing doesn't have enough reach to put your diffuser out over top of your subject. It won't reach that far. So then PLAMP, or the Wimberly, came up with a stake system. Now you can see over here on the left has a little black stake that stakes in the ground next to your subject, and then clamped onto the stake, and then the tubing reaches over. You can clamp it like you see here in this picture on a stem of a flower, or you could clamp your diffuser into it and hold your diffuser over top of your subject. So that's what you'd want to get if you're shooting subjects where you want to be independent of your diffuser and you don't want it attached to your tripod. You pick up a stake. Hunts will have both of these items on sale in their links. I use a little LED light. I mentioned this earlier before we started. I use it for fill light, just to add a little bit of light into a subject where maybe there's a part of the subject I want to photograph that's a little dark, and I can just add a little bit of light into that area. So I was out one morning shooting dragonflies, and the problem with the shooting the dragonflies in the morning is if I shoot them with the natural light, I'm going to have the camera trying to expose for those bright wings, and then as it underexposes to get the correct exposure on the bright wings, it darkens the body down. So I pulled out the LED light that I had with me, and all I did was just add a little bit of light onto it and brighten the body right up. And it's just as quick as just taking it out of your bag and just shining the light on there. It's to me, much easier than a flash system. And this is very rare when I even need it. Most subjects I shoot just with natural light, I don't have any issues with white balance, but high dynamic range like you have in this image. So it's kind of rare when I use it, but when those occasions come up where I need a little bit of light in an area where it might be dark, I can add a little bit of that fill light. All right, so this morning I'm using sunlight as backlighting. This is the only time I let sunlight hit my subject is for backlighting. So you can see it gets this rim lighting around the outside of the teasel head here where all the little spikes are. And then you see the little hairs that are coming off of that stem. Those are being illuminated by that backlighting of the sun. And that's what I'm after, is backlighting here. But the problem is on this side, it's in the shade, so you don't get enough light over here. So all I did was just take my LED light, just shine a little bit of light on there, and then brighten it right up real quick. And I could see how it's affecting the subject while I'm hand holding the light, and I can make adjustments if I need to right there, seeing it live. So that worked out much better than having that dark front like that. A lot better. Now we're going to shoot in our homes a lot. Like I said, in the wintertime, I'm indoor shooting. In the summertime when it's hot, usually July and August, I don't go out and shoot much because it's too warm. So I'll shoot indoors, and I buy flowers at the local flower shops and bring them home. Now, one of the problems that you have with shooting indoors is that, you know, obviously I'm on my stairway shooting. I don't want stairs as my background behind my flowers. And if you're wondering why I shoot on my stairs, is because this is a 2-story high foyer, and there's a huge window up top that floods that stairway with beautiful natural light. It's the best place in my house to photograph with natural light. So that's why I shoot on my stairway. Now, as I said, I don't want stairs as my background, right? So I have to put something behind it as a background. Now, when I started out in the early years, I was using black fleece and creating black backgrounds, and then I was using white for white backgrounds, and I got kind of tired of seeing white and black backgrounds all the time. And I wanted something a more natural looking behind my subject that looked like I'd shot it out in the field rather than shot it in the house with black and white backgrounds. So went out to the local field near my house, and this is some tall field grass that I set up my tripod. I'm using my Tamron 90mm macro lens. I've got the f-stop set at 2.8, the smallest f-stop. Now I manually focused onto this subject here to show you what I'm going to photograph. And when you manual focus a subject, you know that if you go a little bit left or a little bit right of that focus point, it starts to go out of focus, right? So what you want to do is take that focusing ring, go all the way to the left, and then rotate it all the way back and go to the right. And one of the two ways, either left or right, one of the two ways, it's going to take this to a solid blur, okay? When you get it to the solid blur, you photograph it, and you end up with that. So that subject that you saw right there, completely out of focus and photographed, looks like that. So that's a natural green that I would get if I was out there shooting in the field with a flower in front of that grass, and I was blurring that grass out. It would be that color there. So now I can print this out, and I print it on matte paper. So don't print on glossy papers, no gloss. You want a matte paper that's flat. And then you can use those indoors behind your subject. and create what looks like a natural background behind, like you saw those tulips I was shooting. Now let's say that you think that that's too solid of a color, but it's really not. I shoot a lot of subjects where I get that solid color in the background. But let's say you wanted to have a little bit of texture in your backgrounds, a little blotchiness in there. So this is a different subject. So when I take it out of focus, I just don't rotate it to the point where it goes to a solid color. I leave a little bit of texture in there, and you end up with something like that. So again, little texture in there, a little bit of blotchiness, and maybe you think that looks a little more natural. So you have the ability when you're taking it out of focus to stop at any point and photograph it. Now, if you're shooting a subject that has some little yellow flowers in there, you're going to get more of a yellowish green. And if you're shooting things with pinks in it, you'll get a pinky green. And then I go to botanical gardens where they have large plots of colorful flowers, and I just take them out of focus and photograph them. And I have a different shades of colors and things that I can use for my backgrounds, depending on the subject that I'm photographing. All right, so let's talk about depth of field, because when I ask macro photographers what they're struggling with, it's always the f-stops. It's always how much is in focus at those different f-stops, and they get very confused and they have a hard time with it. A lot of people out here say macro photography is difficult. I don't think it's difficult at all. I think once you understand it, it's very simple to do. It's not that hard. Now, the image on the left side here, that pink flower, I'm using a small f-stop, 2.8. And all I have in focus, I focused on this little stamen that's sticking out of this black hole in the center here. And that's all I've got in focus at 2.8 when I'm in really close. And you can see it softens down all the details outside of that flower. And that's what I was talking about earlier about we can be a little more creative with macro photography, because this is a creative style that a lot of macro photographers love to shoot. They love that soft focused look. So that is one style that you can do using those small f-stop numbers. All right. Image on the right side is a big agave, and that's in focus from top to bottom, side to side, and front to back, completely in focus. Now that is done with the highest f-stop. That is f32 on my lenses. Now you may only have 22 on your macro lens, but whatever it is, you go to your highest f-stop and you'll get maximum depth of field. This is another version of that shallow depth of field. This is a 3.5 f-stop on a 180 macro lens, and I just focused on the outside edge of the petal of this trillium flower, right on this edge here. That's the closest to the front of my lens, and then it just softened down into the flower and into the background. And then I have a dragonfly here where I just focused on his little face right here, and with that small f-stop, it just softened his body and into the background. And then this fern here, I just focused on the center portion, and with that small f-stop was able to blur the tops and the bottom of it. Now, this is a style that I particularly like. I like this better actually than the soft focus, even though I do a lot of soft focus and I think they're nice, but I tend to like everything in focus. So these are all done at f32. So again, you see the focus from top to bottom, side to side, front to back on the subject. This one's the same thing. Everything's in focus, f32. And then this little pair here, this hoverfly and a grasshopper sharing a black-eyed Susan flower. And I wanted that all in focus, so I went to the f32. Now, this is a ruler I placed on this table, and I'm using a Tamron 90mm lens. I'm at an angle to that ruler because you know, so there's going to be times when you're shooting subjects you can't get parallel to that subject. You're going to have to shoot at an angle, and you're going to have to learn how to control your f-stops, all right? So when I shoot this at a 2.8 on the left side, you see, all I'm getting in focus is 1/8 of an inch in focus. That's a tiny bit. Get a ruler out and look at 1/8, and that's not very much. That's all I'm getting in focus. Once you go outside of that eighth and hit this line here or this line here, it's already starting to go soft. And then as you can see, as it goes out to the very top and the bottom, it'll blur into a solid color eventually. Over on the right side, I've now changed my f-stop up to the highest f-stop, f32, and you can see I can get everything in focus. Now it's a little bit soft at the very bottom, maybe at the very top. Because when you're in that close, even at f32, sometimes you may not get total focus all the way, but it's pretty good. It's soft enough, you know, or sharp enough, at least on the top and the bottom, that in a sharpening program, I can make it look sharp. This is a spruce cone. That spruce cone is 4 feet hanging in front of the spruce tree. So in other words, I hung it from a line 4 feet in front of the spruce tree. I focused on the flat part of the cone right here. I'm using a 180 macro lens, shooting at 3.5, smallest f-stop. And as I just showed you on the last image, how you get very little in focus, I'm really only getting that little bit on that flat part in focus. And even this little tip where it starts to dip down to the tip of the cone, it's out of focus. And these needles in the foreground here in front of the subject are soft and out of focus. But that tree, which is 4 feet in the background, you can see it blurs out because f3.5 doesn't have enough depth of field to reach back and pull in any details. That's why it blurs out. So that's a good thing. We got a nice clean background. We don't have any distracting, things happening in the background to take away from our main subject. But now here's the problem. I don't get enough depth of field on my subject at 3.5, and I want all that in focus. So now I have to go to a higher f-stop. Higher f-stop is going to give me more in focus. And so we'll get a little more in focus on the subject, which it does at f8. Now you can see I'm getting more focused down here at the f8 and not totally focused up here, but a little better than it was at the 3.5. But look what happens. f8 has enough depth of field to reach back and start pulling in some of those needles. Little bit of detail starting to come in back there. Now it's not horrible yet, but it is distracting. All right. I tend to like more of the look that you saw at the 3.5 with more of a solid color back there. And if we need to go to a higher f-stop, because we're still not getting our needles in focus in the foreground here. So let's say if we go to an f16, now we get the whole subject completely in focus, but look what happens to our background. It's all cluttered up now. Because f16 has more reach, it's going to reach back and pull in more details on those needles. And now if I went to f32, all those needles in the background would be all nice and sharp because I'd have enough depth of field at the f32. So what we're trying to do when we're shooting portraits of flowers and portraits of bugs is we want our subject all in focus. You can see that nice detail on our subject, but we want a nice clean background like you see over here on the 3.5. So that's where macro photographers struggle. They think it's only about using the f-stops. They're using those small f-stops in order to blur out the background, but when they go into the higher f-stops to get more depth of field on the subject, they start pulling in the background. So they're like, I don't understand how we can get this in focus and blur out that background. It's actually very simple. It's not hard at all. So these are images that I shot out in the field, and I have a fully focused subject with a nice solid background. Same with this. Jewel weed flower, nice. Everything nice and sharp, those little dewdrops, the leaf, the flower, and look at that green background. That's grass in the background that I blurred out. That's what I was saying when I shot that grass, and I said that's a solid color. That's what you see when you go out and shoot in the woods, in the fields. Another nice flower shot, nice clean background. Critter portraits, the same thing. When we're shooting our critters, we want our critters all in focus, and we want that nice clean background behind it. And then this little hoverfly up top on this flower, everything's in focus and a nice clean background behind it. And this dewy covered dragonfly with a little pond in the background with that blue color blurred out. That's what we're looking for. We're looking to get that subject all in focus and keep that background taken in. This is what we don't want. We don't want distracting shades of darks and lights and lines and all that stuff behind our subject. We want to clean it up. It's very simple to do. It's not hard at all. So this is the key to flower and critter portraits. This is how it all happens. You have to find the right subject. In other words, I'm looking for an isolated subject away from clutter. All right. I don't want any clutter behind my subject. Then you have to find the camera angle to that subject so that the background is as far away as possible. And the farther the background moves away from your subject, the higher the f-stop can go. We need to find who that is and try to mute them. I don't see anybody unmuted though. Oh, there he is, Carl. All right, Carl, you're muted. Okay, so again, look for the subject matter that is isolated, and then we need to get the camera angle to that subject with the background as far away as possible so that we can get into that higher f-stop. Okay, so this is the area that I photographed that Dame's rocket flower that I showed you earlier in the program. You remember when I was using the diffuser and it was kind of pink and I brought it back to the color of purple? Well, this is the day I shot it and this is where I shot it. Now, when you're approaching a field of flowers like you see here, and you have this large area of flowers all congested and tightly packed together like you see here, you want to avoid those. You don't want to shoot any of the flowers that are in this congestion here, because if any one of these that you pick out, your background is literally inches behind the subject. So that's not going to work. You got to go out to the outside perimeters of these flower beds and look for flowers that are out away from the main clutter here. And this, or maybe one that's up top here that's growing up above all the other flowers. And the one that I chose was this guy right here. And there it is. See how it's growing out independently away from all this clutter over here? Because any of these you shoot, you're going to have a background within inches of it. So this is the one that I want because my background is about 15 feet behind it, this woods back there. So when I go to shoot that guy right there with a woods that's 15 feet behind, I can shoot in a higher f-stop and blur out that background and get enough depth of field on my subject. So let's remember back to that spruce cone. The spruce cone was 4 feet in front of the spruce tree, right? Now at 3.5, smallest f-stop, I could blur out that spruce tree that was 4 feet behind the cone. Didn't have enough depth of field, so it blurred it out. When I went to f8 to get more depth of field on my subject, started pulling in details from that spruce tree at 4 feet behind it. But let's say that spruce tree now moves back to 10 feet behind that spruce cone. f8 wouldn't have enough depth of field to reach back to 10 feet. And if we move that spruce tree to 20 feet behind that spruce cone, I could shoot at f11, maybe even f16, get everything in focus and blur out that background 20 feet away. So that's how this is done. This is real simple. Like I said, this is not difficult stuff. This is a little bladder campion flower. It's down in this tall grass here. Again, you're not going to shoot that because you've got too much clutter around it right behind it. So that's not going to work. But up above where this grass is growing, the same flowers grew right up through the grass and sitting right up high up here. That's the one that I want because, again, I have nothing behind it but a woods off in a distance, so that I can get into the f8s, f11s, get enough depth of field for my subject and blur out that background. So again, it's not only about the f-stops. You know, you need to get into those little higher f-stops to get more depth of field on your subject, but you also need that background to move farther and farther away so you can get into those higher f-stops and blur out that background. So it's pretty simple stuff. It's not hard at all. Sometimes you get in a situation like this where you want to shoot these little white flowers. These are oxeye daisies, and you can see through all this tall grass, there's little flowers all through here. And there is none of these that you're going to photograph with the background off in a distance. So you have to learn when to walk away. You know, you get into a situation like this where it's just not going to work. You just have to say, I'm not going to shoot a bad shot, so I'm just going to forget about this area, go find another area to shoot. Now, you have an option, though. If you really needed to get that shot and you couldn't find that isolated flower with a background off in a distance, you do have an option. You remember those backgrounds I taught you how to make? And you use them indoors? Well, guess what? You can take them outdoors and use them outdoors too. You could just go ahead and put a background behind that flower and photograph it. And you could literally shoot that flower at f32 and it wouldn't matter because you just have that solid color background behind it that you brought out there with you. Now, when I started out shooting years ago, almost 20 years ago, you know, from all those years, I always was against bringing backgrounds with me out in the field because I always thought it was kind of cheating. And I would look at it as like, well, I want to go out there and do it naturally. I want to find that isolated flower with the background off in a distance so I can, you know, shoot it and get enough depth of field, but yet blur out that background. So I never took my backgrounds with me. But as I get older, you know, I'm like 66 now, and as I get older, I get a little lazier. And so I started to bring backgrounds with me, and I found myself tending to just pop a background behind a flower and photograph it. And it's just easier to do, quicker to do. So that's something that you could do if you want to make your life easier. If you don't want to do it like I just taught you how to do it, you could just bring your backgrounds out with you. Now, when I go out into the field bringing in my backgrounds, I have I have them made to a size of 8.5 by 11. I found that that size works fine. I'm usually shooting single flowers, and it works just fine behind whatever I'm shooting, 8.5 by 11. Most of your new backpacks that are coming out now have a little sleeve inside the backpack where you can slip a tablet in there or a laptop in there. Well, that sleeve works perfect for putting your backgrounds into. So I don't carry I don't carry a laptop or a tablet out in the field with me. So that little sleeve works perfect for sliding my backgrounds 8.5 by 11 into it. If you have a larger backpack, you might have a larger area. You could put a larger print in there if you wanted to, but the 8.5 by 11 works perfectly fine for me. Now, when you make these prints, or you have them made by somebody, you know that the print is going to be floppy, right? It's not going to be very stiff. So what you want to do is get some foam core or mat board or cardboard that you can glue that thing onto, or tape it onto, that it'll stiffen up that print so it won't be flopping around when you take it out in the field. Now you can get yourself some two-sided carpet tape. Has sticky stuff on both sides of the tape, and that way you can stick it onto the backing, and then you can take the print, stick it on there, and it'll hold it on there, and you won't have to worry about it falling off or taping it around the edges. You can really literally just stick it right onto the backboard. So 8.5 by 11, like I said, is the only thing I've ever carried. You know, when you're working in the house, you could make bigger ones if you wanted to, but I always kept them small because my backpack tends to be small. So give yourself options when you're out there shooting those f-stops. You don't want to shoot a subject and use one f-stop and then get home and say, ah, darn it, I wish I had more depth of field, or maybe I wish I had less depth of field. Because you might not be able to go back and reshoot that subject, and it may not even be there. It might have been a critter that you shot, and it might not be there when you go back. So while you are set up with your tripod and you've got that subject framed up, shoot at least 3 to 5 different f-stops. All right, 5's better, but you could get by with 3 possibly. But I always like to shoot multiple f-stops. That way when I get home, I can decide which one works the best. The thing is, pixels are free, doesn't cost anything, so there's no reason why you shouldn't be doing that. Again, you don't want to come home with just one f-stop. So I set up a couple calla lilies in my house just to give you an idea what I'm talking about here. Now, there's one calla lily that's in the foreground and one in the background, and I focused up here on this little area right here. I'm using the smallest f-stop, 2.8. So as you saw in that ruler, remember 1/8 of an inch? Yeah, that's about what I'm getting here, a little tiny bit in focus. And you can see the flower that's just behind the front flower is all soft and out of focus. That's the 2.8. Then I went to an f8. So when I say shoot 3 to 5, f-stops, I don't mean like one right next to each other. I usually skip a few f-stops. So I went to 2.8, then I went up to f8, and I shot it again. So this is the f8. So you can see a little more detail on that back flower, a little more detail in the front. Then I went to an f11, shot it again. So that gives me a little more depth of field on the back flower and the front. And then I went to an f16, shot it again. Now I'm getting more depth of field, and then went to an f22 and pretty much got everything in focus at the f22. So now I can go back and I can view these 5 different f-stops and decide which one I like the best. Do I want everything in focus at the f22, or do I want a little softness on the flower in the back at f16, or a little more softness at f11, or a little more at f8, or do I want maximum softness at the 2.8? All right, so then I can choose which one and then scrap the other 4. But that's what you want to be doing when you're out in the field shooting. You want to make sure that you shoot multiple f-stops and then worry about what happens when you get home. This is a pair of sunflowers that I bought at a farmer's market near my house. And I just placed one on top of the other one, and I set them up in my foyer, on my floor of the foyer, and just photographed them just from overhead. Shot this at f32, like I've been telling you, everything's in focus. I want maximum depth of field, top to bottom, side to side. Now, back in 1932, Ansel Adams, who is one of the most famous of all nature photographers. I mean, you can talk to people that aren't photographers and they've heard of Ansel Adams, but everybody that's a photographer has heard of Ansel Adams. He's the most famous of all. In 1932, him and his buddies like Edward Weston and some of the other well-known landscape photographers of that time started a club, and that club was named Group F64. So in other words, they were shooting all their images at the highest f-stop, f64. And that's how their landscapes were shot. They wanted maximum depth of field from the front to the back of the scene that they were photographing. So they were shooting at the highest f-stops. Basically, that's what I'm doing. I'm shooting at those highest f-stops. Now, in 2004, I had joined a group on Facebook. It was when I first discovered, not Facebook, on internet, called naturephotographers.net. It's a critique site. And I just discovered this site, and I got excited because I could share my images on this site with other photographers, and I could also get critiques from the better photographers, because I'd only been shooting for 3 years. So I was still learning how to do this. So started posting my images there. Now, I was doing a lot of this everything in focus images with the highest f-stops, and I'm self-taught. So I just knew that if I shot at the small f-stops, I would blur my image out. But if I shot at the highest f-stops, I'd be getting everything in focus. So when I posted my images, they would always ask you, make sure you post the f-stop, the shutter speed, the lens you're using, camera body, so that when they critique your image, they have a little information to work with. So I'm posting quite a few of these images at f32 as I list them at f32. And so this guy comes online and he makes a comment on my image. He says, "Do you know you're not supposed to be shooting at f32? And I was like shocked. I go, "What is this guy talking about?" He says, I says, "No," I says, "I didn't know that I shouldn't be shooting at f32. I says, "Why? What's wrong with that?" He says, "Well," he says, "when you're shooting at f32, you are creating diffraction in your images." Now, I had no idea what he was talking about. I says, "Well, I don't know what that is. So what is it?" He says, "When you're shooting at f32, the aperture inside your lens that opens and closes, at f32, it's at the smallest opening. It's a little tiny circle opening that your image is trying to squeeze through." He says, when that image is trying to squeeze through that tiny little opening, it tends to shift and move a little bit. And when it hits your sensor, it causes softness in the details of your image. You don't get the sharpest quality out of your image. You're creating soft images shooting at f32. And I said to him, I says, "Do my images look soft to you?" He says, "Well, no." I says, "So what's the problem?" The thing is that we were in the digital days at that time. 2004, I had my first Fuji S2 digital camera, and I have Photoshop. And when my images were coming out of the camera, they were a little bit soft. But I also had a tool in Photoshop, Unsharp Mask. It was a sharpening program that I could sharpen my images. And so I was creating sharpness through the software. And my images all look sharp. So I don't worry about shooting high f-stops, because we have tools to correct any softness we get from the diffraction. Now, when I used Photoshop back in 2004, that's pretty much the only thing we had at the time. But then all these new software programs came out, Nik software, Topaz, Smart Photo Editor, and all those programs will sell you a sharpening program. That's what it's for, sharpening your images when they're a little bit soft. Topaz just came out with a brand new sharpening program, and they claim that they can take a blurry image now and make it sharp without any artifacts or any type of halos, okay? So the sharpening programs have come a long ways. And I was getting sharp images way back in 2004 with just Photoshop sharpening, but it's even better with all these new programs. So I don't worry about the shooting at high f-stops and getting a diffraction. Now I'm going to show you this, what I'm talking about, so you kind of understand it if you've never seen it done this way before. Now here's the problem. And you wonder, well, why are you always shooting at f32, Mike? Is because when we move in really close to our subjects, we have very limited depth of field at the smaller f-stops. So when we're shooting this peacock feather, I position it on top of a table, and I'm at an angle to that subject with my Tamron 90mm macro lens, and I shoot it at f8, I get very little in focus. See, shooting at f8 to f11 creates the least amount of diffraction out of your lens. That's why all the landscape and wildlife photographers try to shoot in that f8 to f11 range, because it creates the least amount of diffraction, gives you the sharpest quality out of your lens. All right, so that's why you'll hear photographers always say, try to shoot f8, f11. It's going to give you a better quality image, they claim. All right, problem is for a macro photographer is f8 doesn't give me enough depth of field. I need more depth of field, so I have to go into those higher f-stops. Landscape photographers, you can shoot a mountain 5 miles away and get great amounts of depth of field at f8, but that doesn't happen in macro, all right? So I need to go to a higher f-stop. So if I shoot this thing at f32, then I can get it all in focus. Now, it's not sharp focus, though, because it does have that diffraction. Now, this was shot with an old film lens. The Tamron Tech people tell me that the lenses they produce today for digital cameras are better lenses than they had back in the film days. They create less diffraction in the newer lenses, so we don't even have as much diffraction as it used to have. But this was shot with an old film lens, and so there is some diffraction in there. Now I'm going to do some pixel peeping here. I'm going to cut out a little slice of that f8. Now you can see in this f8 here, these little tiny fine hairs that I'm blowing up really big are very sharp. So that's telling me that that lens is shooting very sharp images at the f8. But again, I'm not getting enough depth of field to get the whole thing in focus. So I need to go to a higher f-stop. When I go to the f32, pull out the little slice, now you don't see the same sharpness in those fine hairs as you saw at the f8. Same with here now. Here's the f8 up here. You see the fine definition in those hairs, but down here you don't see that same definition. That's the softness that I'm talking about in the diffraction. That's what the guy was telling me back in 2004. But now if I take this f32 image here and I run it through my software and I bring it back in, now look at it. It's every bit as sharp here as it is up here with the sharpening applied. All right. So that's the correction that I need and what I have with my sharpening program. And so I can go ahead and shoot at f32 and not worry about the diffraction because I know I have a tool to sharpen it. No different than correcting exposures in your images, no different than correcting contrast and colors and all the other things we do in our post-processing. We can add in that sharpening that we need if we're getting any softness from the diffraction. So I don't worry about shooting high f-stops. And neither did Ansel Adams back when he was doing it. All right, so now we need to talk about what makes a good image. You know, what do you need to do to create a successful image? And I've found that there's 3 things. It's very simple. You just need a really good subject, and then you need to compose it really well. And then you need to do some good post-processing. Those 3 things is what's going to make a successful image for you. So what are you feeding your camera? I told you earlier that I don't care what camera you have. Even if you have a $500 entry-level DSLR, I'll take that camera and produce images that'll be of pro quality for macro photography. But it's what you're feeding into that camera that makes the difference. If I feed into my camera some animal feces, I will have a poor subject matter. Now, I like the composition. I like the angle here, the feces, and then I like the opposite angle of the lighter colored tree trunk going this way. So composition-wise, it's working pretty well. And maybe the post-processing is okay, but the problem is I've got a poor subject matter. Now, if I posted this on my Facebook page today, I'm not going to get a lot of likes on that image. And I might get some comments, but they might be negative. If I enter this into a photo contest, I'm not going to win that contest. It's probably going to get tossed out as soon as the judges see it. So again, I'm missing one of those 3 elements that we need to make a successful image. This is a nice subject matter, but the problem is I've composed it real wacky. And it doesn't matter how good of a subject you have. If you do a poor job composing it, then if you entered into a contest at your camera club, your judge is going to knock it down if the composition's not good. So again, missing one of those 3 elements. And then we have to do some good post-processing. That's a huge part of what we do today. You know that, again, speaking of Ansel Adams, what set him apart from all the other photographers is his post-processing that he did when he was in the darkroom. He was a master at creating dodging and burning and that strong contrast in those black and whites that he did. And that's what set him apart from all the other landscape photographers, is that post-processing skills that he had in the darkroom. And when you have good post-processing skills in your software programs, it makes a huge difference on your images, okay? This is a subject I shot at a Cox Arboretum. It's just north of Cincinnati, Ohio. I was down there doing a workshop on a weekend, and I came in early on Friday, went up to Cox, and I shot this subject. And it was, subject I'd never seen before. And I got really excited because I thought, wow, this is a really cool subject. I really like this. I've never seen it before. And so I photographed it, took it back to my hotel on Friday night, and got the laptop out. I want to do some processing. Now, typically what I do for my processing is I usually just enhance the saturation of the colors, maybe bring out the colors a little more. I might go to the contrast sliders, add a little contrast in, and then do some sharpening. And this was shot with a Tamron 90, and you can see it's nice and sharp. That's right out of the camera. So as I said, at f32, I'm getting sharper images now than I did back in the film days with the better lenses. All right, so I was doing some, post-processing and playing around with this, and I decided I was going to go into Nik Software Color Effects Pro 4 and try some of their creative filters to see if it would, create anything unusual. And I was just, hitting each filter as I would go through the different 57 filters. I was getting down towards the bottom, and there's a filter called Solarization. And when I clicked on Solarization, I ended up with this right here. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, look what happened to that thing. These things are just popping out of this dark hole, this black hole, and all the petals are like extremely highlighted. And I thought, man, is that cool looking? So it took it from this kind of bland looking, which would have been just some basic post-processing I had done. By just clicking on that creative filter, I ended up with that. Now this image here, if you ask me which out of my hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of images is my favorite, I would have to say that this one is. And it's partly because of that post-processing that created that look in this image. It just took it to me to another level, okay? And I use this actually for my image on my website. When you open my website up, you get to see this as the first image. Now there was another interesting thing that happened with this image is Google, they decided that they were going to compete with Facebook and start their own version of Facebook. This was quite a few years ago. And so they called it Google Plus. All the photographers that were over on Facebook found out about Google Plus, and they said, hey, we're all going to go over Google Plus and start, friending each other over there and sharing our images over there. So I went over there too, started sharing my images. Now, they were getting hundreds and hundreds, well, actually thousands of photographers coming into Google Plus, and they're posting thousands of images every day. And Google decided they were going to have a few of their people go through and view all the images that were being posted every day. And each week they would pick out 10 images and they would post them out there and say, these are the 10 top images of the week that were posted. This image made it one of the weeks as one of the top 10 images posted. And that image, last I saw, had well over 3 million views on it. So again, if it would have been just this image here with a little color boost, a little contrast boost, a little sharpening, it would not make a top 10 image of the week. But with that special filter that was applied, that's what created that look. And it's kind of the same look as what Ansel Adams did with a lot of his images, where he burned down the skies and blackened skies. It was something you never seen like that before. But it, again, took it to another level. This is a calla lily I shot in my house, and I did some nice post-processing on this image, because if you look at the original over on the left, that's the image out of the camera. The images don't come out of the camera looking very good, I'll tell you that right now. Now that background is just some black fleece, and I wanted a black background behind my subject, and you can see the colors of the flower are kind of washed out. But the image on the right side, you can see I've enhanced the colors, added actually a filter that softened down the details in the petals, and then took that black background of the black fleece and just blacked it right out. So those are all the things that we have, those tools in the post-processing, and we can take a pretty bland looking image right out of the camera and make it look much better. Now, I was talking earlier, number one thing you got to have is a good subject matter. It's the most important thing. You got to have a good subject matter, and then you have to compose it well and do good post-processing. So I posted these two images. Both images are feathers laying on the beach. Now, I asked the people that would view these images if they would just take a second and hit the like button on the one that they thought was the best of the two images. Which is the best image? Hit the like button on it, please. And as you can see, the image on the left over here got 102 likes down here, right? 102 likes on this one. This one only got 4 likes. I'm surprised that even 4 people thought that this image was better than this one. All right. This should have been 106 to 0. Now this image over here has a better subject matter. You can see the separation in the veining creates a nice S-flow here. And you can see here, you've got a little V at the end of this one here. And this one over here, this little grouping comes and kind of overlaps this other group right here. So this is a much more interesting subject, much more interesting feather than this one over here on the right, which has perfectly aligned veins and perfectly aligned edges. This is much more artistic, more creative looking. So this is a better subject than this one. Also, this one has better post-processing. You can see the warm feel in that image, the warmth that I added into it. Whereas this one, there's really not much going on in the post-processing. It's just kind of bland. So that's my point. Good subject matter, good post-processing, good composition gets 102 likes. The one on the right only gets 4 likes. All right. So it's very important that you're finding really good subject matter. Now, when I started in 2001, I went and bought a camera on eBay used, and I bought a lens, some lenses, and I bought tripod and head, and I went out to the local parks to start shooting. And I remember running across a dead tree trunk like this, and it had this white fungus growing out of the side of it. And I got excited because it was something I'd never seen before. And I thought, wow, look at these little white things growing out of the side of this tree. It's pretty cool. Let's photograph it. The problem is that it's not a good subject matter. It's a blob of white growing out of the side of an ugly tree trunk. It's just not a good subject. But the thing is, in 2001 to 2004, I didn't know the difference between good subjects and bad subjects. It took to about 2004 before I finally realized, I needed to find better subject matter. Now, this next image I'm going to show you, this is a much better subject matter. They are both images of fungus growing out of a dead tree. But this is a good fungus. This is not a good fungus. And again, it took me till 2004, 3 years of shooting before I finally figured it out. I needed to find better subject matter, because if I show this image to people, they're going to go, so what? It's a blob of white on the side of a tree trunk. But if I show this, they're going to go, that's really cool. So that's the difference between the photographers that come to your club on a regular monthly basis with really great images. They're really finding really good subject matter, okay? Now, in that first 3 years that I was shooting from 2001 to 2004, I told you that I wasn't finding good subject matter. You know that there's not one image in that first 3 years that's on my website today. I shot for 3 years and produced 0 images that are on my website today. Because again, I was just learning how to work the cameras, learning, finding good subject, learning how to compose, good post-process, all that stuff. So it took 3 years before it finally fell into place. All right, here's a fern that's on a black, dark colored tree trunk, and it's really a poor subject matter, not a very good subject to photograph. So you would want to pass on something like that. But look at this fern here. That's a beautiful fern on a black burned tree trunk. That's what you're looking for. You want that nice, pristine quality subject matter, okay? Now this image here, not necessarily one of my favorites. I could probably name a whole bunch of them that I would say I like better than this one, but this is my most successful of all the images I ever photographed. This image was shot in that trip in 2004 to Yosemite. It was underneath a bridge. There was all these burnt tree trunks laying on the ground, and ferns were growing over top of those tree trunks. I photographed this with a Fuji S2 6 megapixel digital camera. That's generations, many generations ago in the digital cameras. And this today is still my most successful image I ever photographed with that old 6 megapixel digital camera. So again, you don't need an expensive camera to do this. This image right here won highly honored in the Windland Smith Rice International Photo Contest. It was second place image of the year on naturephotographers.net in 2004 for the flora category. It has been published in Outdoor Photographer magazine in 3 separate issues. It's been published in other magazines, and Hewlett-Packard bought the rights to this image. Hewlett-Packard owns the rights to this image for all advertising. So it's been a very successful image, made me a lot of money, and again, shot in 2004 with a 6 megapixel digital camera. I like to go down to Florida and shoot palm trees down there, the fan palms. I'm just always fascinated by the palms because we don't have that up in Michigan. So when I go to different locations throughout the country, I get to shoot things that I don't see in Michigan. And so that's a lot of fun. But this is not a subject you want to photograph to impress anybody with. It's, again, it's a poor subject, ratty, brown, torn up edges, and all kinds of things that are floating around throughout that image. So it's not something you want to photograph. But here's a really nice palm that I photographed. So I'm looking for those that have a lot of lines, a lot of interesting designs happening throughout there. Now these palms are green, but in post-processing, I gave it different shades of color in the post-processing. Now, when you find these really good subject matter, they're not always in pristine condition. You might find some brown spots on them. You might find a little bit of decay. You might find dirt on them, little specks of dirt. But I don't worry about that stuff because I know those are things that I can clean up in my post-processing. I can go and use the healing brush and the spot healing brush and the clone tool, and I can clone out any little imperfections. And I will do that. I will take the time to clone all that out and make that as perfect as possible. Here's some lily pads on an old ratty pond. You can see some, slimy yellow stuff growing around the pond, the lily pads. And again, hope you don't shoot something like this. Now you're probably thinking, who in the heck would shoot anything like that? Well, I'm involved in about 5 different groups on Facebook, and I post images every single day on those 5 groups. And if you follow me, you see me out there posting every day. And I go and I study hundreds and hundreds of images on all those groups every single day. And I do see people posting images that look with some pretty poor subject matter. Now, I have to think maybe those people are like me in the first 3 years that I was shooting, and they haven't really figured out to identify a difference between good subjects and bad subjects. But this would be a subject you definitely would want to pass on and not shoot. But look at these lily pads that I shot. Those are beautiful lily pads. Those are what you want. You want nice, pristine quality subjects. Those are raindrops that had fell earlier in the day. This was shot in the backyard at a friend's house. He's got a little pond, and he's got lily pads in the pond. They are beautiful, pristine lily pads with beautiful, clean water around them. So that's the kind of subject you want to shoot. Now, I'll just show you some other things that I photographed because I am always searching and looking for unique subjects that people haven't seen before. So when I show my images, people can look at them and say, wow, that's pretty cool. I've not seen anything like that before. All right, and this is an interesting subject I shot at the Chicago Botanical Garden, and it looks like a spiral staircase that's going down into a black hole. And again, very unusual plants. I've only seen this one time, and again, when I show this image to people, they're impressed with it because it's something they haven't seen before. And it's like I was saying about that shot in, when I was in Yosemite shooting with those other photographers at that scene that Ansel Adams made famous. If all you're going to do is shoot stuff that everybody else is shooting, you're not going to impress anybody. You got to go off on your own and find something a little different. Here's a tree trunk from a bristlecone pine tree. Now, you may think that that's a large area, but that's actually very tiny. It's about 4 inches by 6 inches. And that's how much in these bristlecone pine trees, the bark just swirls around in all kinds of different designs. And that's a really cool shot. And it has some really interesting flowing lines in it. And a black-eyed Susan covered in frost. Now, that's a very rare shot because where I live in Michigan, we don't get frost till about the middle of October into November. We'll start seeing some frost. But by then, usually the black-eyed Susans are long gone. They're dead and gone, see, mid-October. But this was a real early frost we had in like September when the black-eyed Susans were still standing. And I was able to get this shot. Now, again, it's, I've seen thousands of images of black-eyed Susan. It's very, very rare that you find one with that. And that's kind of what we're out there looking for, is something different, something rare. Purple coneflower, typically they're growing just a single flower with petals that are just drooped straight down to the side. This one here, we had a little seed head that grew right alongside of the coneflower right here. And one of the petals is reaching out and giving it a hug right here. And then you have a very interesting flow of the petals down below. This is very unusual. Most of these are just hanging straight down. And I get a bonus, I get a bug on it too. So really lucky that day. When I go into this field of flowers, I'm not looking for the standard flower to shoot. I'm looking for something different, something unusual in the petals, or like this here where you find this seed head growing up alongside of it and one of the petals reaches out and hugs it. So that's what I'm looking for. Here's a couple fiddleheads. These are very difficult to shoot because they're low to the ground. These are probably only 8-10 inches above the ground, and you're going to have grasses and all kinds of stuff, that's plants that are growing around those fiddleheads. So they're very difficult to shoot unless you put a background behind them. Now you could take out your printed backgrounds and put that behind there, but I actually used a large skunk cabbage leaf that was nearby and put the leaf behind it. This image also was one that I had won highly honored in the Windland Smith Rice International Competition. I also like to look out for holes in tree trunks that are laying on the ground, trees that have blown over. They have cavities in them sometimes from animals. This one here had this very unique looking design in the cavity. Now this area that you see here, again, looks like it's pretty big because you're thinking those are tulips in there. And I stuck those flowers down inside because it just take this hole there and make it into a flower vase, natural flower vase. Now that area is only about 5 inches wide by 7 inches long. It's not very big, it's small. And it took me 4 months before I found a flower that was small enough to fit down in there. Now those flowers are called orange stars. They're only 3/4 of an inch tall. And they look like little tulips when they're budding. So I found those at a local florist, bought them, took them out to that stump out in the woods and stuck them down there and photographed them. F32. A friend of mine caught a millipede, and I was in his house, and he has a little studio, photographic studio in his house, and we put the millipede on a table, and he curled up into this curl and got this really cool shot of that millipede all curled up. And the tree buds in the springtime, watch your tree buds. This is another thing. I never see anybody shooting tree buds. There's so much creativity that pops out of those little tree buds, but you got to make sure you watch them, because once that little area that you see there pops out, those open up into big leaves and you've lost the composition. You got to get them when they're just starting to sprout out of those buds, and they're really cool. I've got a whole bunch of these shots, but again, this is something that I've never seen anybody else doing, and that's what we're trying to do. Come up with something unique, something different. You want to take your photography to another level than just shooting the standard stuff everybody else is shooting. Framing your subject is really important, because I see a lot of photographers that frame their stuff improperly, okay? So when I have a subject to photograph, the first thing I have to identify, is it a tall subject or is it a wide subject? And that's going to determine the framing. This is a teasel here. It's a tall, skinny subject. Nothing special about the subject. I was just using this as an example. If you shoot this as a horizontal, being it's a tall, skinny subject, and you shoot it in a horizontal framing, you're going to have a big gap of nothing on the right and a big gap of nothing on the left, okay? And I see this happening all the time, where people are shooting tall, skinny subjects with horizontal framing. When I see these, I'll say, hey, if we were to draw a line down here and separate this area right here, all right, is there anything inside of this area right here that makes your image a better image? And usually the photographer says, well, no, there's nothing there. I says, exactly. It's not going to help make your image a better image, so why have it there? Eliminate it. Get it out of there. So we'd want to take this tall, skinny subject and shoot it as a vertical. And now we've eliminated all that left and right. We've also created a larger subject in the frames when we went to vertical, so now you can see the textures and the details and the spikes better than we did in the horizontal version. Now, I also have wide subjects that I photograph. So this is a pair of teasels, and they're wide. So again, if it's wide, it's a horizontal framing. We don't have all that gap. But if we take this same subject and shoot it as a vertical, we're going to have a huge gap over top of it, okay? So wide subjects, horizontals, tall subjects, vertical. Now, if you were shooting for a magazine cover, this would be okay. You would want to shoot with a lot of space at the top, because they're going to put their name of their magazine up here, and they're going to put a bunch of text in these areas that have vacant space. So for a magazine cover, that works really well. But if you're shooting this subject for your house to hang, you want to shoot it as a horizontal. Now, what happens if you run into a subject that's kind of square? You look at it and you go, I can't tell whether it's taller than it was wide. It looks almost square to me. Then what happens is I shoot it vertical and horizontal. So this is the horizontal version, and there's the vertical version. I like the vertical better than the horizontal. But I didn't know that until I shot it both ways, because again, it looks kind of square to me. It's not really, it's not like the teasel was tall, skinny, and the other teasel was really wide. This, I can't tell whether it's taller than it is wide, so I'll shoot it both horizontal and vertical. Fill the frame for more impact. So I always, have photographers will say, will you look at my image and tell me what you think of this flower shot here? I say, well, if I could see the flower, I might like it, but you've got it so small in the frame, I can't hardly see it. And you've got way too much of the background. The main subject is the flower. So why not have it larger in the frame so it has more impact? So on my flower shots, I fill the frame with them. And when you fill the frame, you're able to see all the fine details in that flower. See all the hairs growing off the petals and off the stem. If this flower was as small as that little purple flower, you wouldn't be able to see all that fine details. So make sure when you're shooting flowers, fill the frame as much as possible with your flowers. You'll be able to see a lot more of the details. Same with this here. Got a leaf that's the main subject, but we've got way too much background. So let's make the leaf more of the main subject and less of the background. Okay, gang, well, that's about all I'm going to teach you today. I've got tons more stuff I could teach you, but we don't have time for today. But there is another way that you could learn a ton more from me, and that's through my Macro Photo Club. Now, I started this Macro Photo Club 3 years ago, August. And my goal was to create instructional videos teaching you how to do macro photography. I think that's the best way that I could possibly teach you, rather than through books or ebooks, things like that. Videos are the best way. When I started this club, it's an online club. I thought, well, maybe I can get 100, 150 members in this club. We have over 2,000 members from 18 different countries now. So I'm pretty excited about that it grew to that size in 3 years. And every day I get new members signing up. Now we have about 230 videos now. It's over 200, up to about 230. And I'm constantly creating new videos and adding them in. Those videos cover 4 different categories. So you're going to have videos on composition. You're going to have videos on post-processing. You're going to have videos on equipment. And you're going to have about 100, little over 100 of those videos are me in the field actually photographing subjects out in the field and teaching you how I do it, okay? Now, when I started this, I had to figure out what I was going to charge people to join the club. Well, I didn't want to get into a monthly fee like you see some of the other teaching programs like lynda.com or Scott Kelby's programs or some of the others, Visual Wilderness, that they charge you a monthly fee to be a member and have access to their videos. I didn't want to do that, so I created a one-time fee. It's a lifetime membership of $99. You never have to pay again, and you'll always have access to the videos. We also have a Facebook group for our members, only for our Macro Photo Club members, and we have about half of our membership in that Facebook group, and they post images every day, and they share images, and they can ask questions if they have any issues with their macro photography. They want to ask a question, they can do it there. And then we have a theme each month, and people will shoot that theme for that month and post their images. We also have 12 sponsors for this photo club, and each month one of my sponsors gives away a product that I raffle off to the membership. So each month you have an opportunity to win some product from one of our sponsors. If you're interested in joining, just go down to the bottom. You'll see in the yellow down there, it says tinylandscapes.com. That's my website. And when you get there, you will look at the top of the first page that comes up, and there's a link in the center that says Macro Photo Club. You click on that, and you can go through the process to sign up and be a member. I guarantee you will learn a ton of stuff. I've just taught you 90 minutes. Well, there's like hundreds of hours of videos on there, so you will learn a lot more than what I can teach you in 90 minutes. Okay, so let's get Shirley back in here, and
Hello.
we will ask some questions. Anybody that may have typed in a question or wants to ask a question, we can unmute them. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here.
Okay.
So we can see all these people.
We're all hiding our videos.
Nobody wants to be seen.
I'm back. Okay,
All right,
questions. We have got, will it be recorded? We took care of that. How short can the legs on the Vanguard tripod be set in order to get low to the ground?
Well, they will actually go straight out. they will literally go straight out. You can literally put the tripod right on the ground, and because the center post rises up and goes horizontal, it has no effect on those legs when they go straight out. So your camera can literally be sitting right on the ground if you want it to.
Okay. Do you always use a tripod?
100%.
Okay.
I'm 100% on a tripod, and the reason being is because I'm kind of shaky. Whenever I've tried to hand hold, I'm a little too shaky. And even with the image stabilization, I come out with too soft of images. So I'm always on a tripod. The other thing is too, is I'm shooting high f-stops many times, and you're going to slow your shutter speed down. With the tripod, I don't have to worry about any shake during the slower shutter speed. Yeah.
At f32, do you have any issues with diffraction, or does your lens not have that problem? You might have addressed that. But
They must have missed that part.
no, actually, they asked it before that part.
Oh, okay. So I did cover it for them.
They didn't miss it, they asked it before.
Yeah. And that's a real common thing that, photographers, especially photographers in camera clubs, know this. Okay. They've heard about this. And it's always been preached for years and years not to shoot at high f-stops. But as I said, when I was first starting from 2001 to 2004, I didn't know that. I wasn't hanging around photographers, so I had no clue. So I was just shooting f32. And again, with the software that I had, I was able to sharpen out any softness from the diffraction, so it wasn't a problem. And again, today the lenses are much better. They create less diffraction, and we still have all kinds of tools for sharpening. So it's not a problem. I shoot a lot at f32.
Can you discuss the differences in depth of field between full frame and crop sensor cameras and your preference?
Well, I only like the crop sensors because they add a little focal length onto my lenses. So let's say my crop sensor in my body is 1.5 crop sensor, it's called. And so if I was shooting with a 100mm macro lens, I would actually increase it to a 150mm macro lens with that smaller crop sensor camera. If you got a full frame and you're using 100mm, it's still 100mm. So with the crop sensor, I boost it to 150mm. So I get a little more reach with the crop sensor. I like that. You probably, with the full frame, because I've never shot a full frame, so I couldn't tell you the difference. I've never compared the two side by side to say, if you're getting more depth of field or less depth of field with one or the other. So that I couldn't answer, but all I can say is with a crop sensor, I get more focal length out of my macro lenses, and that's a good thing.
And so your preference obviously is crop sensor.
Crop sensors out. Yeah, I'll always purchase a crop sensor over a full frame.
Do you focus stack, or do you just rely on the smallest aperture to get the greatest depth of field?
Okay, so that's a question I always expect and I always get. Why don't you focus stack? Well, there's a few reasons why I don't focus stack. One is focus stacking requires a series of images to be shot. Sometimes if you're shooting a 2-inch deep subject and you're shooting with an f-stop at a 1/4 of an inch of depth of field, you got to shoot 8 shots at least. And then they'll tell you to overlap those shots so you don't miss a gap. So you might have to shoot 12 images of that flower. You try to go out in the daytime and shoot a flower 12 times and get it to stay still.
Yeah.
It's impossible. Okay. It's very difficult to shoot outside and shoot a lot of images of a subject without it moving. All right. And all you need it to move 1 or 2 times during that series and it messes the whole thing up. I've learned that I can get all the depth of field I want by just going to the highest f-stops. I have no need for focus stacking. Focus stacking has its place, and that is in very high magnification images. Now, you'll see a lot of the bug photographers that'll fill the frame with the fly's head, and they're using focus stacking and shooting 50, 60 images of that to get it all in focus because the depth of field is so shallow at that high magnification that they're getting almost no depth of field. And even at a higher f-stop, they still don't get enough depth of field. So that program is designed mainly for the really high magnification images. I don't shoot that. I shoot close-up photography, which is larger areas, so I get all the depth of field I need. But if you're shooting in the 2:1, 3:1, 4:1, 5:1 magnifications and you're really high, then yeah, focus stacking is probably the way to go because you're going to get that extra depth of field you need through the focus stacking, where you can't get it with the f-stops. But again, it's got to be a subject that's not going to move, right?
Right.
So
Right.
that's a big problem. Now, Helicon Focus, which was the originator of focus stacking, they actually designed that program for microscopes. And what they were finding the problem was the microscopes being such a high magnification. When they would look at cells through the microscope, they couldn't get enough depth of field to see the cell and get it all in focus when they would photograph it. So Helicon Focus was designed to photograph those cells and shoot different series of cells, images, to get it all in focus. And that's what it was designed for. And then they decided that, hey, let's package this and sell it to macro photographers, because they deal with, high magnification with very little depth of field. But for shooting close-up photography like I do, I have no need for focus stacking. I can get all the depth of field I need by just using the higher f-stops.
Do you primarily shoot in manual or aperture?
I always shoot in manual. It's just the way I started, the way I learned. And so for me, I'm comfortable shooting in manual, but you could shoot in aperture priority. Your main thing is you want to make sure you control that f-stop. And if you let the camera do the exposure and the shutter speed, that's fine. But the thing is, even when you're shooting with aperture priority, if the camera gets fooled on the exposure, you still got to make the adjustment by plus and minus compensation. So you're kind of manually focusing. I mean, you're relying on the camera to get the exposure correct, but if it doesn't, then you got to correct it. Aperture priority, a lot of people like to shoot in because it just takes away from the hassle of having to adjust the shutter speeds. All they have to do is worry about the f-stop, so that works just fine. But I do both through manual because, again, it's just how I started and I learned, and it's just automatic to me.
What type of camera do you use?
I'm using the D7000 Nikon camera, and that camera, as I said early in the program, is 9 years old.
Okay,
and
so
I'm still using it.
You've been a Nikon man for quite a while then.
Yeah, it's only because I started with Fuji cameras, which were Nikon mounts. And when I got sponsored by Tamron, they provided me with lenses that were for the Fuji cameras, which were Nikon mounts. And so when Fuji stopped making SLRs, I went to the Nikon D7000. And my lenses were already mounted for Nikon. That's why I ended up with Nikon. I have no preference. They all do great. All cameras are good. It's the person working the camera that makes the difference. It's not the camera. I think that was another quote in Ansel Adams. He said the most important part of the camera is the 12 inches behind the camera, your head. It's not the camera.
I think that's very true. That's all the questions that have come up on chat.
Okay. All righty.
So I think we're done. I want to thank you from everybody that's on.
Awesome.
We had a top number of 24. I see a lot of clapping hands going on.
Yay!
Yay! And just send me the link for the recording when we're done.
All right. You probably should have it.
Hey, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't remember you guys addressing it. I was wondering if you can get greater depth of field with a macro lens than with a telephoto zoomed way in.
Oh, I missed that one. Sorry.
Yeah. I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't know the answer to that. Again, it's nothing. I've never compared the two. So I'm not sure, if I could answer that. I would have to play with it and experiment and put them side by side and play with it. But that would be something that would be interesting to try, though. But no, I don't know. Like I said, as far as depth of field goes, I'm always shooting. If I want everything in focus, I'm just going to the highest f-stop. And so either lens that I use gets me plenty of depth of field. So, but this is an interesting question, but I couldn't answer that without having some kind of comparison done with them.
You wanted to give us the website of Hans for the tripod?
That will be coming out via email. I've got a long email list from them. So that's not on this video. It'll be sent to you through the Camera Club.
Thank you.
Now, if for whatever reason this recording didn't record or you don't get the email, I have a link that the Maryland Photographic Society they actually recorded this and they put it out on YouTube. So it's actually available for people to see if for some reason if we don't get the video for your group,
Okay.
email me and I'll send you the link. And
Okay.
you can send the link to those, and it's the exact same program. So
Fabulous.
they can see it there if our recording didn't come up.
Yep, sometimes that happens. All
Yeah.
righty. Okay, well, thank you very much again.
All right.
for your
Very
time.
good. Thanks for coming, and appreciate you all being here.
Yep, we'll see you on Facebook.
Yep, I'll be there.